join us here, and then we'll get started. Wonderful to see so many of the familiar faces who have been involved in the Black homeownership work. Always great to see all of you. And to see elected officials joining us. Councilmember Asefa, welcome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started here with the critical mass that we have and the number of people we have today to kick off this Black homeownership initiative, policy and program reform conversation. As we start the event, we would like to acknowledge that we are all, wherever we are, on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples. We do the land acknowledgement as a sign of resisting the erasure of the first peoples of this land and to honor their resilience. For this event, we will be focused on a conversation about how we advance home ownership opportunities, in particular for an area that we know has been persistent in our region and in our country. We know that the wealth gap in ownership opportunities or in intergenerational wealth creation has been persistent for so many years and centuries in the country. And we have been working over the last few years towards developing a plan. And last year, in 2021, we convened for the first time collectively as partners across the Puget Sound region to talk about what it is that we could do collectively and identify actionable steps. We talked about a challenge statement at our first meeting, which was to say, what is it that we're challenging ourselves to do? And we committed to increasing specifically Black home ownership to the point where we can close the gap between Black and white home ownership rates. And we understood that it was going to take not only policy work, but also capital investments. Mm-hmm. Now in 2022, we are here after having launched a comprehensive Black home ownership 7-point plan that we launched in October. Many of you joined us at the Housing Washington event. And then beginning of 2022, the Civic Commons kicked off the Black Home Initiative, which is an implementation part of the work that has capital investments, working towards creating 1,500 new homeowners and 3,000 new homeowners by 10 years. So 1,505 and 3,000 in turn. And that is the work that's going to be supported with resources to really get us to a place where we're beginning to advance efforts that are tangible in closing the persistent wealth gap that we've seen over the years. But then the other side of that work is how do we continue to enable policy change and program change that can facilitate the creation of home ownership opportunities. And the Housing Development Consortium has remained committed to implementing the 7-point plan policy area work, where we will continue to coordinate the advocacy efforts in partnership with all of you in shared leadership, advancing efforts to put forward policies and programs that can really effectively address this challenge. And we have different pillars that have been identified within a policy frame that I want to provide an overview of here. And I've just talked about the Black Home Initiative. That is the capital side, and you hear a little bit more from Michael Brown at Civic Commons in just a few minutes, who's going to talk us through some of the work planned there. And then here I'm going to talk a lot more about the policy work and provide you with an overview of the policy framework. The policy framework has 4 pillars supporting it and getting us to a place where we can increase home ownership. We're looking at the reality that the challenge around home ownership is really an issue of supply, and we're going to need funding support to really create income appropriate opportunities for ownership. So we're looking at different policies that can really be addressing and programs that can be really addressing the funding needs. We're also looking at the reality that zoning and land use policies limit the ability to create ownership opportunities for BIPOC households and especially for Black households. So we're looking at different policies there and regulatory reform. We're also looking at acquisition of land.
QWC, this is in
We're also looking at acquisition of land and value capture tools that can really help us advance opportunities for home ownership. And then we're looking at cost reduction efforts that we can advance over the years to get us to a place where we're reducing the cost of production of homes or the cost of accessing ownership overall. I won't get into the details of these policies because these will be discussed extensively with a panel of leaders that we have joining us here today. And you will hear from our moderators who will be kicking us off in moving forward that discussion. But on zoning reform, we're particularly looking at policies that can really meaningfully increase supply and access to affordable entry-level and market rate homes, especially for first-time home buyers. And in our case, we're looking at how do we advance that across the region and overall for home ownership, but in particular, how do we do so for Black households as well? The second pillar, as I explained earlier, is the large-scale acquisition of land. We know that we have about $53 billion that's being invested in our transit infrastructure across the Puget Sound region. What is it that we can do to really scale the acquisition of land around some of these transit stations before the land value skyrockets? And what else can we do to preserve the little affordability that we have and ensure that those opportunities are being utilized for ownership while also expanding the rental stock in that same effort? And then we're also looking at cost reduction. We know that there's a demand and supply side of that. We know that there are people who get access to ownership, but may not see the long-term benefits of ownership. So we want to be looking at how can we enable people to be able to live in their homes that they purchase and see the long-term equity benefits for owning that home. So we're looking at policies that try to get us there in meeting both the existing owners, but also some who may be renting and don't have opportunity to purchase. Can there be a state program that's looking at enabling that? And some of these policies will be discussed extensively by the panel today. And then lastly, but most importantly, is the funding part, where we continue to emphasize the need for more subsidy, the need for more added funding to really support the production of income appropriate homes. And this is extensive work that you will also be hearing about from the panel as questions are being brought up about what is it that we can do in terms of tactics, what can be done in increasing down payment assistance programs across all parts of the region, what can we do to also increase the investments and subsidy to produce income appropriate homes. So that's the overview of the framework. I share this because I would like to invite all of you to really lean in this work as we move forward over the next few months to partner and move forward efforts, whether it's a policy that's being introduced at a local jurisdiction level or at the state level. We want to be present for those and collectively coalesce around them. With that, I would like to hand over to a leader who has been a partner in advancing this work, and we're really grateful to have his leadership in this region, Michael Brown at Civic Commons. So over to you, Michael Brown.
Hey, thank you, Patience, and hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. A lot of my comments will mirror or complement what Patience laid out. As Patience said, we need a policy framework, obviously, but we need to marry that with capital, with infrastructure in order to move the needle toward better outcomes for low, moderate income households, and in particular through the Black Home Initiative for Black households. So let me just step back for a second and just provide a bit of a frame about who Civic Commons is and why we're stepping into a role. What Civic Commons is it's a new way of tackling action on Greater Seattle. So not just Seattle, but Greater Seattle into Pierce and Snohomish County on our biggest economic and social challenges. And each of you who do work, within housing or other issues know that we have some significant challenges. And part of the challenge is that we're not tethered together in a way that allows us to utilize our individual assets collectively in order to get to transformative outcomes. So we at Civic Commons operate in that messy middle. What we're trying to do is build the infrastructure and the collective muscle that's needed to address root cause and the root causes of inequity in our region. So a really difficult thing to do, but a necessity if we want to have the type of region that truly works for everyone. So last year, a national effort led by the Center for Community Investment in partnership with JP Morgan launched an effort called the 3C initiative, Connecting Community and Capital. And 6 cities across the country, metropolitan areas, including Seattle, were invited in to address a equitable or housing challenge within their region. And based on a lot of the work that had been done or was being led in this region around homeownership, and in particular Black homeownership, it felt like it was a really great opportunity to bring that issue into the scope of the initiative. And as a result, Civic Commons is playing a convener role. What we're doing is working with many of you, as you see a lot of familiar faces on this call, in bringing together public sector, private sector, philanthropy, nonprofit developers, for-profit developers, policy makers, et cetera, who are working in this space together to identify shared goals and priorities, and then create the type of enabling environment that allows us to deploy capital in some new and different ways. So as Patience mentioned, we, the collective we, because this truly is a co-design approach, identified a very ambitious goal. 1,500 new Black homeowners over the next 5 years, spanning South Seattle into Pierce County, into Tacoma. And part of this effort, obviously, is looking at the barriers that have led to the inequities that we see. And all of you know them probably far better than I could spend time attesting to. But we know about the discriminatory housing practices or redlining and restrictive covenants. We also know about the challenges of affordable housing and homeownership just overall in this region, which are creating incredible barriers to homeownership for low and moderate income families. So what we're trying to do through the Black Home Initiative is create a multi-sector initiative that connects capital more effectively, that is aligning the work of many great efforts and great partners in a way that feeds off of each other, that actually allows for us to move forward, hopefully a little faster than we would do on our own, to achieve something different. So what we're trying to do through this work is identify, once again, those barriers, but also how do we utilize capital in a different way to obtain land or to create new funding mechanisms aligned with the needs of developers, or target a variety of housing types and methods of sales. So there are a number of things along the way that we know can help support the pipeline. But a lot of that, once again, will come in partnership with many of you. Our commitment to racial equity in this work and to affordable housing as a way, not the only way, but as a way to create wealth and opportunity for communities of color is real. And all of you are, once again, are working in this space. And our belief is that collectively we can do community development in a way that actually works for individuals and households in the communities that we're trying to reach. I'm not going to take more time, patience, because I do think it's going to be really important to get to our panelists. So how about I turn it back over to you to introduce our moderators today.
Thank you, Michael, for that context. And we will move on now to our moderators. We do have the pleasure of really being dedicated time and commitment from Cliff Cawthon from Sightline, who has been a true partner in the Black Homeownership Initiative over the last year, really participating in the policy group and reform in drafting the Black Homeownership 7-point plan and now operationalizing that work. And then we have Katisha Atterbury from LMI Black, who's also graciously joining us and has been supportive in pulling together this panel and reaching out to elected officials, and has done extensive work herself in the community in really advancing equitable opportunities for Black households. And with that, I will hand over to the two of them to kick us off and introduce the panelists that we have. So Cliff and Katisha, over to you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, cool. So first of all, I just want to say greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining us this wonderful sunny afternoon. Yes, emphasis on sunny afternoon after all of that rain. So before I get into the panel, I just want to give a shout out to some of the elected officials from the Tri-County area who I've seen join us today. So thank you for everything you do and the work that you put in, and look forward to having more conversations with you down the road. As well as I want to give a shout out to a number of other full team members and community leaders from the Black Homeownership Initiative, as well as leaders in the community whom I've worked with quite a bit. And you, without going through the extensive list of all the amazing change makers, visionaries, and icons of the of Washington State that we have on with us, just want to say thank you. Seriously, thank you for joining us. And Katisha, before I go into the introducing panel, do you have any words? Or?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katisha Atterbury. Just wanted to say thank you for having me. See a lot of familiar faces and folks who are really committed to addressing this issue of Black homeownership. So honored to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. So first up, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Representative Jamila Taylor, representing the 30th Legislative District. Thank you for joining us, Representative Taylor.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll be very brief. I am Representative Jamila Taylor, currently the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. And intergenerational wealth has been a priority of the caucus in our session. What is unique about this year and the work that we're doing is that we grew from 5 members in 2019 to 10 members in 2022. And that type of influence across the region is not just in downtown Seattle. It is throughout Western Washington. So Snohomish County, Pierce County, and of course King County. But we have really strong tethers into the whole of Washington State, and we see how these issues are impacting Black families differently in different areas. And so having comprehensive policies to address the middle housing issue is with House Bill 1782, an incredible bill that we need to get over the finish line is one in particular. I would say that working really well with our local leaders, I think that's an improvement that I believe that the Legislative Black Caucus members, as well as other fellow lawmakers, are looking to do, because I think our state is losing traction on this issue, and it shouldn't. We are an area that has a growth in many professional areas and is attracting many Black families to the area, but we're not retaining them because they can't afford homes here. They're not being able to find community here. And we really need to address that in the long term. And then, of course, when we have families who are intergenerational. So, if you imagine, my parents are aging, and if one of them passes a home to the three children, one child wants to move in, another child wants to rent the property, and the other one wants to, sell it outright. How do we have these conversations about our intergenerational wealth and passing on our legacy in this way? So I'm here just as much to learn from my colleagues on the panel and from the audience members so that we can implement policy that truly works for the whole community.
Awesome. And also, as a fellow South King County resident, your neighbor, I must say thank you so much for your marvelous, prodigious, and as always, brilliant leadership and advocacy in the legislature. And from one South King County neighbor to another, I'd like to introduce Tukwila City Council member and longtime leader in the region, Mr. Deshaun Quinn.
I'll be super brief because I want to get to the questions, but I'll just say this. I'm Deshaun Quinn. I'm a council member in Tukwila, and I've been on for 14 years. I'm also a board member for Terra. I'm on the Criminal Justice Training Commission, all things related to being of service. And so it's a privilege to be here on this topic. I can't wait to get into the gritty details because there's a lot more that we can do. I see some familiar faces, and it's empowering, and it's important that we all come together in this space and really talk about the challenges and also get to know kind of our journey and the paths along the way so we can partner better towards a greater outcome. So even some of the projects that I've been involved in have been kind of fits and starts. And the whole point is that we have urban spaces, we have the urban growth boundary, and we have all this opportunity and all this need as it relates to housing, and how do we bring people closer to realizing that dream of home ownership and creating generational wealth.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And heading east, our third panelist, Bellevue City Council member, Mr. Jeremy Barksdale.
All right. Thanks, Cliff. Good to see you. Good to see everybody. Good to see Taylor and Councilmember Quinn. Good to see y'all again, and everybody else. So Bellevue City Council member, been on the council for about 2.5 years. I'm really excited about this topic because as someone who grew up in North Carolina in a Black community that has history, I think it's important that we have the opportunity to move into communities, own and build our own history, because that's what's going to create that welcoming and that sense of belonging for us. So I'm excited about this topic, and as you can imagine, we have our own challenges in Bellevue that I'll speak to, and look forward to sharing those.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And last but not least, heading downtown to King County Assessor, Mr. John Wilson.
Thanks, Cliff. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I'm the county assessor. I'm that guy, especially around this time of year, people refer to me, especially as your tax bill just got paid. And wait till you see your property value for the next year. But set that aside, this is an issue I feel very passionate about. And part of it goes back to my upbringing and my political heritage. Something Deshaun and I share is working for a guy named Ron Sims. And I still vividly remember talking to Ron about what home ownership meant to his family, They were able to buy a home in the redlined portion of Spokane, but the equity they were able to get from that house literally helped them put Ron and his twin brother Donnie through college. And you're struck how we have fallen so short of that promise and opportunity in our community, and the terrible, terrible price we pay as a society by not creating avenues for renewed and expanded generational wealth. And there are all kinds of factors in it. And sadly, it's not limited here. I chair a national task force of major urban assessment jurisdictions that include New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, and that. And to one extent or another, they're all struggling with this issue. And it's been something that we've been advocating within IAAO for them to take a harder look at how assessment practices and value setting and a variety of things around property has built-in racial factors that cause discriminatory and oftentimes detrimental impacts to creating that generational wealth. And we need to talk about how we deal with displacement. And Representative Taylor, you're right. How do we deal with that missing middle? But deal with it in a way that, frankly, when I come in to set your property value, I don't bump you out of your house because your value's gone up too much. That's why it's so important to have a discussion like this today and the wide variety of people that you have here, because we really need to take a holistic approach to this. There isn't any silver bullet. There isn't one solution. I don't pretend to have it, but I think it's one of the things that's absolutely crucial if we are ever going to be a region to reach fully our potential and truly be a region of economic, racial, and equity. We've got to tackle this, and we've got to tackle it now.
Thank you. Thank you. So just one housekeeping point before we go into questions. And the first question will be for the entire panel. So I will go in the order I introduced you for the questions for the entire panel. And also for our participants, if you have a question or a comment, once we go through all the questions, we will open it up for some Q&A. So please feel free to put that in the chat. Myself and Ms. Atterbury will be looking at the chat and helping to facilitate that Q&A. So without further ado, we'll dive right in. This question's for the entire panel. So thank you again for sharing all of your experiences with us. I know for me, particularly today, it hit pretty, it hits in a very special and significant way. But what do you hear from your constituents, the people you work with on the ground, when it comes to the ability to own a home? And Representative Taylor, I know you eloquently elaborated a little bit on this, but for the entire panel, what do you hear when it comes to owning a home in your area, in particular, and in particular from BIPOC communities? So I'll start with you, Representative Taylor, and then to you, Councilmember Quinn, and you, Councilmember Barksdale, and then to you, Assessor Wilson.
So in my community, I'm in Federal Way and surrounding area. And so this is an area that's tucked between Tacoma and Seattle, and the economic drivers that those beasts are. And you would think that, we would have affordable homes in Federal Way. We don't. We are getting priced out so rapidly. I mean, it is so quick. Families are frustrated that they can't purchase a home in the area where they could have less than an hour commute to their job. And there are a lot of jobs out there that are not on the bus line or not in a convenient travel lane. And so we have folks who are in, lower end jobs or working class jobs where they need to have flexibility of going from job site to job site. There's a high concentration of folks who are in the labor movement, who are teachers, who are in places where you no longer can afford to live in the community that you want to work in or serve in. Even law enforcement, that folks are living further and further away from the jurisdiction of which they are navigating. And so it gets frustrating for individuals when they're trying to purchase a home and build a life in a community they feel invested in. I've heard of folks who work in retail, like Panera Bread, who live all the way down as far as Lacey and commute into Federal Way to work. And that's crazy making. We have seniors who are like, I'm priced out of the ability to sell my home to get into something and downsize. So it's not that they want to age in place. Some folks really do want to age in place, but some folks are stuck in place. And so that causes for us to have limited inventory, especially in the single family, single level home for folks who are just trying to start out. So I would say folks are very frustrated that they can't even get into the market here. My father, who's trying to purchase a home in the area, is frustrated that last year he was looking at a house for $500,000. That was a steal back then, but that same house is now at $750,000, $800,000. 1 year. 1 year. And we really need to look at who's buying these homes and who's having the salaries to get the homes, and why are we not looking at all the opportunities that is like allowing for more people across the economic spectrum to own homes in our community.
Awesome. Yeah. And by the way, I should add, if for our panelists, if, someone nails it and you don't really have that much to add, feel free not to, but also feel free to add and come in on a question, even if, it's not necessarily directed at you. So, we can keep it free flowing. So thank you for that, Representative Taylor. That was awesome. And now Councilmember Quinn, do you have something to share?
Yeah, Cliff, thank you for that, that prompt. Let me just quickly say that being born and raised in Seattle, I come from the African-American community. My parents lived in the Central District. They lived in the Red Line areas. They were involved in the Civil Rights Movement. I had aunts and uncles that lived on Madison Avenue. And so that's the kind of culture I came behind. And so specifically, when I talk to our residents in the community, Tukwila is a place where we've, for over 30 years, have become an immigration receiving site, which a lot of those residents decide to stay and purchase a home. But not unlike what Representative Taylor has spoke about, at this point, we're in the space where you have to drive to qualify. And if we really want to kind of break it down to numbers, to even get started, to have a conversation about purchasing a home in Tukwila, because it used to be a Boeing bedroom community. And, as folks say, it was affordable for them to buy it early on in the 60s. And so we've had this legacy of affordable housing that has gone away. So for example, just to break it down to the numbers, $500,000 just for a teardown. Just for a teardown, let alone whatever the cost is to build up the home. And then in Tukwila, we're 8.5 square miles by 8.5 square miles. So the availability of land to build is also challenging. So we have to do infill development and do greater density. And what then we run into is characterizations around affordable housing. So now people don't want affordable housing, although they got into this community when it was affordable. They don't want to make it affordable for everyone else. And, there's a use of code words and other things that we use to keep people from having the ability to buy a home. But we have been successful. We were able to bring Bellwether in. They've built a facility. We have other developments that are coming in, but what we do run into, unfortunately, is the backlash, right? And so there's a lot of frustration. And I think now is time for us to build partners. I've worked on issues as it relates to land trust and other things that can actually be a buffer for home ownership. But again, I think we have to be comfortable that we really need to kind of populate the urban space. And in order for that to work, we need to make zoning changes. And we're going to make mistakes along the way to do that. However, we have to kind of lean forward and think about creative ways to do infill development. There's people on this call that we've partnered with, and I understand their challenges, and then we kind of work through those things. But then there's this other piece. We have this idea of traditional home ownership, single family lot with a certain size. And now the secret's out on Tukwila. For a long time, it wasn't out, but it's out now. It's 10 minutes from everything. If you think about it, it's 10 minutes from Seattle, it's 10 minutes from 405 and the freeway, it's 10 minutes, you want to get and go to Tacoma. And so what we're actually having is seeing the slide from Seattle, and especially in the pandemic, people who were able to purchase homes in areas that maybe they don't work. And so they would run up the list of bidders on a single family, let's just say 2-bedroom, and the price will go up. And then let's say it's even a 1960s style, it goes up to $700,000 just to get in the door. And so we have challenges unlike our parents because there isn't a developable space. And we need to think about, buying on a transit line. Instead of going to the kind of drive-to culture, maybe we are more comfortable with having one car because it's the only way we're going to get through this. And knowing that the population projections is to go up 1 million people, where are they going to go? We kind of got to go up. So even I have balked at some of the development because I went to school at Garfield High School. And when I'm on Union, I don't recognize it. But for a minute, I just had to kind of check myself. And that is, this is a beautiful place to live and everyone wants to live here. We have a good quality of life. So we just have to make the adjustments necessary. And I don't have to tell anybody here, but our codes and zoning laws are probably 10 years behind where we need to be. So because Representative Taylor did such a great job of articulating kind of the issues, I think I wanted to come at it from a different angle, and I look forward to more of the discussion. And here's the other thing, and I'll stop here. In 2019, it's tough being an elected official that cares about people and is willing to make the hard decision. And there is this backlash that is occurring where you don't get progressive-minded or innovative-minded elected officials to serve in these roles. And that's actually what we need to do to get us through this kind of firestorm, because there's a greater need. And Representative Taylor, Tukwila is, the home of South Center. But none of those people that work at the mall can afford to live here. The teachers that teach in the school cannot afford to live here. The police officers that are actually on the street cannot afford to live in Tukwila. And I don't think that our parents, and I'm not knocking them, but they didn't prepare us for a $700,000 home price. So we need to figure out a way, a path, a partnership where owning a home is attainable and in a way where you can actually build wealth.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much, Representative Taylor, for setting us off. And thank you for that truth, Councilmember Quinn. And Councilmember Barksdale, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I'll add. I think Representative Taylor and Councilmember Quinn hit a lot of the points already. But what I will add that I think is also a challenge in Bellevue is that I hear, in addition to feeling like, you have to leave to purchase a house, right? Because you don't feel confident that you can purchase or can afford a home in Bellevue. And we have similar challenges as Councilmember Quinn mentioned in terms of people, and Representative Taylor, that the people who work in Bellevue can't afford to live in Bellevue. I mean, if you could imagine, just as he mentioned, if they're having to go out past Tequila, past Federal Way, I mean, that also speaks to how far they're from Bellevue, right, as well. So one of the challenges I think that we have also is that we don't have a large Black population in Bellevue already. Less than 10% of our population, according to the last census data, is Black, Indigenous, or Latino. So it kind of tells you where the Black population falls in Bellevue. And so as a result, we don't really have the services in Bellevue for Black people. And, you know, when you talk about like, where do you want to live, and, you know, being around the services and the community that you're a part of. And I mean, that ties in quite a bit to whether you feel like you belong in that community. So in addition to the housing challenges, I mean, we have the challenge of, in addition to the home ownership and affordability, even including rent, you know, there's the challenge of even just having the services and the community around you in Bellevue, I think is another one of the challenges that with home ownership, right? You get, it makes it more feasible to, or more possible to have that, right? Because as we move in, the services, the people can maybe afford to have the mom and pop shops that provide the services, and we start to build that community in Bellevue. So I guess the only thing I'll say too is I think people are sort of stretched so far that I don't even know that they can even think about purchasing. I mean, there was, you know, from one of our community-based organizations, it's actually in Redmond, based in Redmond, but they do a good amount of work in Bellevue as well, the Centro Cultural Mexicano. You know, during the pandemic, talking about how community members were just abandoning sort of their rental units because of the concern about the impact of evictions, right? And how that would make it even more difficult to be able to live in the city. So just thought I'd highlight that. Also, just, I think part of this, you know, the topic of diverse housing types has come up, and just the lack of even townhomes, condos, you know, those sort of types of housing that are more affordable and can serve as a entry path and longer term housing, even, you know, for many people in our community. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And last but not least, I wanted to see if Cecil Wilson wants to contribute to this question, and then I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Ms. Atterbury, so we can go into weeds even a little further.
Sure, thank you, Cliff. You know what I hear from people in the community, like one of the people I'm in regular contact, some of you may know her, Ruby Holland. And Ruby is profoundly concerned about displacement. It's been one of the things we've been talking to Representative Harris Talley about, legislation she proposed to deal with it. And we've got an idea that we want to carry forward, even if she's not going to be in the legislature next session. You know, by way of anecdote, you know, what is frankly and sadly all too true in parts of Southeast Seattle, which have historically been Black-owned community, Black-owned homeownership, is you see cases where those houses have been selectively picked off over the years. I remember talking to one gentleman, probably in his 70s. He had bought his house in like the early 80s. And it was, you know, the classic sort of Southeast Seattle 1,200 square foot bungalow. And it had a view of that thing that on a sunny day looks like a mountain. And back in the day, you know, he paid maybe, you know, $35,000, $40,000 for it. Mortgage was never more than $250 a month. And now I come by and I go, you know what? The world's changed. You know how much that house is worth? $1.5 million. And you know what the property taxes on that are? $15,000 a year. Suddenly, we've created pressure that's driving BIPOC homeowners out of the community, creating greater unaffordability, and actually serving a tremendous detriment to maintaining the kind of housing diversity in that. And it creates problems that, you know, Representative Taylor, you mentioned. One of the things we're seeing increasingly is corporate REITs that are coming in and buying single family residents. And, you know, look, by law, my database is publicly available. Anybody can take it. And what you find is there are literally, in some cases, sadly, predatory speculators that will target, and they can look between the data we provide, census data and other things, and they will look and see where, look, that family's been in that house since the 80s or the 70s. And the demographics of this is such that we think that may be a Black-brown family, and we can buy that house, I bet you, for a fraction for what it's worth, and tell them they don't have to pay that damn county assessor anymore. And then we'll take it and we'll flip it and we'll make millions on it. Meanwhile, that family will struggle with, where do I go? Okay, I got some money, I didn't get enough. In some cases, I've frankly gotten ripped off. And we've talked to Attorney General Bob Ferguson about this, that in cases where we think we can prove that there was criminal intent, we intend to pursue criminal charges against that kind of speculative buying. But what we've got to do is also think about, how do we figure out how we deal somehow incentivizing and different opportunities for home ownership. Certainly one of them is, you know, Africa Town, a community land trust, and looking at how we explore that more. You know, and the irony of the world that we live in, Joaquin Garrett, who runs the Africa Town project, actually played baseball with my eldest son. I've known Joaquin for 40 years. And it's been remarkable to see what he's doing and how impactful that could be on opening up ownership opportunities in the community. We've got to look at different models for funding first-time buyers. We need to look at how we deal with the property tax, so that one of the things, if we could give homeowners a tax break for being owner-occupant of the home. Washington is one of only 10 states in the United States that does not have a home ownership exemption. One of 10. And one of the impacts means is that is easy money then for speculators to come in, buy a house, flip it, either leave it vacant in some cases. That's been, for example, one of the things that's happened in Vancouver, BC, where offshore investors buy properties and they literally use it as a bank. They store the money there because they know, man, I'm going to be making 10, 15, 20%. To the concern I've heard a lot voice already too, the rate of increase we're seeing, and my assessment colleague, Linda Helly from Snohomish County is here too. I suspect you're seeing some of this, Linda. We will later this week announce our new beginning of new setting values for the next year. It's going to be shocking and worrisome, because what we're seeing is a real estate market that's out of control. Now, yes, it has cooled off in the last 6 months because of higher interest rates, inflation, a variety of things. But, you know, Sean, you mentioned, you know, houses going up. I'm seeing houses that go up $500,000 in 3 days' time from when it's put on the market to when it's sold. $500,000. Who's got cash for that? So we've got to get a handle on this. And we have to take, and again, I come back to kind of what I said earlier, it has to be a holistic approach of looking, how do we increase housing stock? How do we increase affordability? How do we increase density? And how do we deal with property taxes so that, frankly, if you upzone stuff, I don't come in and jack your value up so far that you end up having to move anyway. And I know that from personal experience. In my enormous free time, I put together a consortium of my neighbors to build multifamily. I'm literally 150 feet from the Roosevelt Light Rail Station. I have 2 tunnels under my house, and that. But the fact is, my property values went up a little bit the last year, like 115%. And the fact remains, we've got to get a handle on this as a whole and keep our eye on how do we create more ownership opportunities to create that kind of generational wealth that can be passed on. Otherwise, we're kidding ourselves.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, all the panelists, for the very rich discussion. This is a great Great talk about these really pertinent issues. I'm going to go ahead and just move us along. Thank you again. This next question is for all of the panelists. And I'm sure the real estate developers in the room, much like myself, we are a mission-based real estate development company. We would appreciate the responses and answers to this next question. To Tax Assessor Wilson's point, needing stock, affordability, and additional density are factors that prevent us real estate developers from being able to create more home ownership options. So with that being said, expanding our public grants that finance affordable home construction to create sustainable home ownership opportunities is critical to increase the supply of income appropriate home ownership opportunities require. What opportunities from existing programs or any programs that need to be expanded do you all see for this increase in funding? And again, this question is for all panelists involved. I'll just go ahead and do a roll call. Maybe we can start with Representative Taylor on this question to see if we have available financing coming for us.
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question for my colleagues to take on in the next legislative session. You know, how do we ease the burden on individuals and families? You know, if you're a college graduate and you have $200,000 in debt, income appropriate home doesn't exist for you. You have a mortgage before you have a mortgage. And so you think about some of the realities that folks are trying to address. So how can we legislatively ease the burden of the cost of folks who are trying to get into the market? How can we, increase the options and improve on practical things that slow down the process of getting approvals for developing in communities? For example, there are many municipalities that have really long and confusing and arbitrary permitting processes that increases the wait time to get development done. Again, the middle housing bill where we and the ADUs that we can increase in communities. Like there are housing areas where you have a middle, what is it called? The mother-in-law home or apartment in your home. It doesn't change the character of what you're living in. It still looks like a single family home, but there are two families, one or more in that household. And so that increases density, and it still is a community that it has the character of where folks want to live. Also, we need to think about not everyone is suitable for living in a single family home with a lawn and all the things that go along with that. So how do we change the dynamic of what is a housing option? So for folks like me, I'm a single individual. I would rather buy a condo or a condo like a unit where it's a townhome, and how do we have more of those dense options available to us? Again, there's this stigma to anything other than a single family home that is a McMansion. Why is that? That is like the worst waste of space in terms of environmental impact. So there's so many things that we need to do in terms of policies that go hand in hand with the cash delivery. The cash stocks, the resources for not only the developers. And again, like when folks think about public dollars going to investments in community, there is less political will. I'll just be candid to, line the pockets of developers. So we have to turn this conversation around. Is how does it actually end up into the hands of individuals who are the fabric of our communities? So I just want to make sure that when we're talking about increasing the financial resources into community, how does it actually benefit residents?
Great, thank you, Representative Taylor. Wanted to open it up to Councilmember Deshaun Quinn to respond to the question. What opportunities do you foresee exist in the affordable finance funding opportunities in your area?
I'll be brief because just the nature of our kind of political structure, you know, there is limitations on municipalities as it relates to, it's really kind of state and federal preemption components. But I'm very appreciative of what occurred at the state legislature around funding affordable housing pot. And so here's where COVID comes in. We ended up having to use some of that money for rental assistance to stabilize people so they would not be a mass exodus of our residents in this community. There are county grants, which we have leveraged. We're going to have 2 tiny home developments in our community, transitional housing. And then the MFTE. But a lot of that is based on partnerships with outside organizations to really create kind of the economic structure to really bring home ownership with kind of the profit margin as it relates to developers. And here's what I'll say that I appreciate that developers and then the real estate professionals have done is in running for office, we had questionnaires and they really leaned in on the development of affordable housing. And what that does is really challenge the folks that are running for office to be mindful of where the opportunities are. So that was a sea change in my career. So I very much appreciate it. I served on one of the kind of regional housing consortiums for a long time. And it's really like leveraging and maximizing those dollars for projects. And that has been successful and continues to be successful. But the reality is there's not a lot of money. Now, separate from that, as a jurisdiction, we have limited funds, and we all know kind of the taxing structure. And, you know, so having a pot for affordable housing, we can do it, but it's a small amount of money. Just because our revenues aren't where they need to be. As a matter of fact, with the CPIW, you know, we are facing a $5 million deficit just because, you know, it costs more, like we're all experiencing, to live. And so those are real impacts as it relates to the budget. But that's where partners come in. That's where programs, we have BECU and other institutions that we've talked and partnered with, and actually organizations have kind of helped home ownership become real in the community. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Council Member. Just wanted to circle around to Council Member Barksdale. We wanted an opportunity to respond to the question.
Thank you. Yeah, Deshaun hit the point about us being restricted in terms of, you know, what we can do at the local level. But so I'll just some context, I guess, for some of the East Side cities, we are partnered through what's called a Regional Coalition for Housing, and that is a housing trust fund where each of the different cities, it's 11 member cities, puts money into that trust fund. So when I was reflecting on the question, especially around home ownership opportunities, I don't think we currently provide much in terms of grants for the construction of homes that can be purchased, but Arch sells homes below market rate. So they basically put a covenant on properties that they have so that it stays affordable, and they sell those homes. I think obviously, like, there's additional opportunity to explore. You know, one of the things that I've been pushing for is the ADUs, and part of the reason is because even if you own the home that the DADU is on the similar property, it in a way makes it more affordable too, in the sense of if you can rent out that unit and generate income. that can help help you with paying off those the mortgage, if you will. It's not a program, but I do think it's one of the approaches. But I would also not terribly versed in other approaches that we can use that I am interested in learning more about what we can do there.
Thank you. Just want to finish it up with Seth Wilson. Tell me you have a creative approach to this problem in terms of being able to offset the construction costs related to development in any kind of way.
So you all should, Marty certainly knows, obviously he's got something up his sleeve. There are a couple of things we can do. One is we need as a community to do a much better job of taking surplus public land and putting it in. We don't do that well. And one of the things we did 4 years ago, we identified roughly 24 parcels, largely in Seattle, that were publicly owned by the state, the university, the city, the county, Sound Transit, the port, that all could be put into housing use. You want to know how many of them have been put into housing use? So there's one thing we can do. Another thing, if you go up to Vancouver, BC, and you look across the skyline of the Lower Mainland, you will see skyscrapers. That's where you see TransLink light rail stations and that. It is something that we as a region still have not gotten smart about, and we have to. There's some indications that we're doing this. Certainly, you know, over in Bellevue with the Spring District is an example of thinking smart about transit-oriented development. But again, I'll give you an example in my own neighborhood. We tore down the old QFC that my kids worked at and used to go shop at, and Bellwether and let's see, it was another housing group. Deshaun, you mentioned. Oh, pardon me, I'm having a senior moment. At any rate, they built a 7-story building. Okay, that's cool. But why wouldn't you not, in situations like this, build like a 30-story building where the 10 floors of it were social housing that may also be structured in such a way to lead to ownership, and that you use a mixed public-private model to create more housing ownership opportunities. We have to figure out how we can revise our condominium tort laws so that the liability thing does not become such an onerous prohibition against building condos and creating that kind of ownership opportunity. The other thing we ought to be looking at is how do we modify the multifamily tax exemption to create the kind of housing that we truly need. And I'm on a panel of state DOR right now, or Commerce actually, to look at that. And one of the things we're suggesting is rather than simply measure how many affordable units you're getting, look at square feet. Because one of the great problems you find with housing right now, if you simply leave it to the market, and you know, I don't begrudge developers making a buck, but what they will stamp out in cookie-like precision are studios and 1-bedrooms, because they're easy, they're certain, and they move them and that. But that doesn't mash up or align with what our actual housing needs are. And we oftentimes need that 2 or 3-bedroom unit so that a family has some place to live. It also shows that we're not being culturally savvy. We find that especially in immigrant populations, Somalis, East Africans, other Eritreans that are coming to our community, they live multiple families in a single housing facility, a single unit. And that we don't take that into consideration. We figure sort of everybody either is going to have a studio, a 1, or a single family 5,000 home. That's not reality. It's not the world we live in. It's not the world we will live in. So it's those kind of things we've got to get smart about and figure out how do we create policies, incentives that truly deliver us the kind of housing we need and at a price we all can afford. Let
me just jump in real quick. One of the challenges that we have legislatively around these issues is that there's the Housing Commission or Housing Committee, Housing Human Services and Veterans Committee, that is independent and separated on the House side from the local government committee, and where some of these decisions should be made hand in hand in terms of policy, because when they're separated and not addressed as a holistic issue, we end up with policies that actually don't address the bigger picture, and that we are constantly chasing our tails as we're trying to address the needs of our communities. And so my hope is that the powers that be, the upper management, if you will consider combining these committees so that we can have these conversations hand in hand, because having them separated, that's how you end up losing opportunities to address these challenges. It becomes a whack-a-mole, if you will.
Thank you, Representative Taylor. Thank you all again for the continued rich discussion. I'm gonna move us along in the interest of time. The next question will be directly for Councilmember Barksdale and Councilmember Quinn. Bellevue, Tukwila, and other GMA planning cities are preparing for the major periodic comprehensive plan update that must be completed by 2024. What opportunities do you see in the comprehensive planning process that will increase access to homeownership? I'm going to go ahead and ask Councilmember Barksdale to kick us off with this one.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll start out by just saying, for those who aren't familiar with the comp plan, that it's a vision for the city, lays out the policies that are required for any later land use code changes and zoning changes. So in terms of the opportunities, I think we need the language, and there's, at least in the Bellevue comp plan, there's a specific section on housing. And I think we need to make sure that we talk about home ownership and equity in our comp plan in a way that staff then takes that direction and applies it moving forward through for other programs. Just as context there, in many cases, staff will look for places to pull in the framework, like the comp plan, and the decisions as rationale for the decisions that they make. In addition to the fact that the land use code has to be in alignment with the comp plan. So I will say that I think a lot of that plays into how much we engage in that process. We are just kicking off that process now, and we need the community input. I will tell you, I don't normally see us at the table that often in these conversations, but I do think that that's for a number of reasons. Some of it's awareness, and we've been pushing to get more of the word out, but also just the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, we just have such a small population. So people are so busy and at capacity already. And so trying to make time to engage just becomes a challenge, so.
Thank you, Councilmember Barksdale. Councilmember Quinn, would you like to respond to the question?
Absolutely, and I just want to thank Councilmember Barksdale. 2 years in, did a great job of walking us through what a lot of people actually kind of don't plan for, right? It's that looking into the future of where you want to be, and so not necessarily holding on to your vision of what was, but what could be. And so that's what the comp plan definitely is all about. And, we actually set some goals around affordable housing and home ownership. And now this year we actually get to assess the success or not, right? And so I would just say in 2015, it was a year actually I was running for mayor. And, there was that moment where you realized I'm willing to give up what I want to get what the community needs, because we actually engaged at a high level on the comp plan with the community. And we actually had those loud voices, those not in my backyard folks, really trying to put pressure on us to take these things into consideration. And I remember we had a 30-minute debate around equity, what it means. And what I would say is going into this comp plan, we actually have an equity and social justice initiative with goals that talk about systemic racism, that talk about the history of redlining. And all you have to do is, look up the UW history. Tukwila is in there with some very pretty offensive words. So we have some work to do to address it. But the other thing is we have partnerships around land trust. And so we would further then land trust opportunities, unique partnerships that are being built in, and goals are being set based on those things. It's because we took the chance, right? And we can use those as models. And back then in 2015, we talked about ADUs, which are now allowed in Tukwila. And, we probably need to have some reform because in Tukwila we have large lots. And so you have to have a minimum size of 6,500 square foot to have a detached ADU. But we have had those stood up. Now, the flip side to that is property values go up significantly if you have an ADU. And so is that addressing our problem? So we have a chance to assess the things that we want to develop. But I think the really good thing is that we have stood up affordable housing, home ownership. And as Assessor Wilson talked about, the multifamily tax exemption, like getting the outcome that we really want, because that's 12 to 20 years where there are no taxes generated from that because you are providing affordable housing. And then the flip side, and I know I'm talking a lot about backlash because it's just the history of systemic racism, right? Is we now have residents saying we want them to pay taxes, so we don't want you to do the MFTE. So you kind of got to be a student, but also a student of history. So I would just encourage everyone on this call. I am older. I won't say how old I am, but I'm still learning, right? My parents came here through the Great Migration, my grandparents. But a book to read, Color of Change, lets you know why there isn't wealth generation in the community. It makes sense why home ownership wasn't achieved. And then when we talk about racial covenants, you can only receive some of your equity in your home because you've been characterized in a Black neighborhood in town. So that wealth will only go so far. Now, the flip side to that is now those handcuffs are off. And so everyone can realize their equity, but then affordability is significant. So for those that are actually working in this space, I would just encourage you to also do that self-work of learning. So if you're working with partners, and I'm kind of looking at Gregory Davis and other folks, where folks step into this space, you got to have the sensitivity around the issues. And so I said the Color of Change, or Teo Nesse Coates, A Case for Reparations, where it just talks about kind of how home ownership really wasn't a home ownership for African-American families. It was a contract that you never realized any of the investment. So I think now with data and information, we can be more educated in this space and really figure out a way for Black home ownership to be realized. But you kind of got to be students. You got to challenge and ask the questions, and that's what we do in the comp plan process. And, for Councilmember Barksdale, I often use other jurisdictions. Well, they did that, so we should be able to do that, which then creates the space to get successful. And then I just wanted to do one other name drop. Tashara Jones, who's the mayor of St. Louis. She did this great thing around financial literacy, because before that, I believe she was either the assessor in St. Louis. She brought forth the child tax credit, or not the child tax credit, but the child saving account. Representative Taylor, if we can get that, I think that would go a long way in building wealth. But there are other things that can be done that we can partner within our comp plans so that we can realize 10 and 20 years out the goal of more ownership, home ownership in the community.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, thank you, everyone. This is really great. I'm going to just take a quick pause and move us into a Q&A session. And then I wanted to take some time at the end for all the panelists to respond to that box. And this will be directed to any and all panelists. I will take Marty's question. It seems at times that we need a narrative shift around home ownership that can drive a much different level of commitment of policies and resources. Does the public and elected community believe that owning a home should even be an option for households who have lower incomes? Is it understood that home ownership does have to solely be single detached structures? What would it take to create an effective narrative shift? I know we kind of, some of the panelists kind of spoke to this a little bit. If you care to elaborate or respond, please do so.
I mean, I can go on a little bit. I mean, again, I think we need to change the narrative of what a household looks like. I mean, multi-generational homes. I live in a home with my mother and my brother who have ongoing chronic health needs. And so I'm not the picture of what people think of a homeowner. I live in my mama's basement, and I say that in jest, but that is a reality, and that many of folks who are my age, the squeeze generation, as well as our younger folks have. But why does it have to be a negative? It doesn't. So we need to change the narrative of who's in a household and why can it be beneficial to look at the makeup of a home. And when you're talking about communities of color that have multi-generations in their home, because that is their cultural norm, I mean, that's stability. That's a great opportunity for families to solve multiple challenges within their home unit, you know, daycare, elder care, family care in other ways, and ease of burden in terms of, you know, sharing resources in other ways. I also think that if you do want to live independently, you know, condos and other opportunities to purchase a home that is, you know, attached to someone else. And again, if we look at the policies and the challenges around building more condos and condos like homes, then we might be able to have folks who are ready to buy their first home. Owning a home is a significant responsibility. So when you pay rent, you know that the lawn is going to be covered by somebody else. There's certain requirements that go on in multifamily housing and other things that you would be responsible for when you own a single family home or a condo unit, that not everyone is really ready to do so. And then we also have folks who are on very, very fixed incomes that, again, I have a significant love for the developmental disability community. Not everyone from the developmental disability community can afford to or want to, even if they, like, let's say, inherit, property or what have you through the family, have the ability to own a home. So, I mean, I think it's a basic question of, does one desire to own a home, have the responsibilities of going with that? And if they do want that, how do we make it as easy as possible for folks to do so? Our communities are more stable when people own a home and know that they're going to be there for 30 plus years. It's a public safety opportunity where you know your neighbors, you know they're going to be there for a long time. I mean, like when we have neighbors who are investors from another country and you never see them, and then they have tenants who can't find the landlord to get the assistance that they need. I mean, there's a conflict within that situation. So I think that if you don't want to own a home, I shouldn't, stigmatize you for being a renter. Sometimes you just need that flexibility. Sometimes you don't want that responsibility, and that should not be a problem. So I think we need to change the narrative around how we exist in our housing situation across the board.
I can do a real rapid fire response. Yes, and I think we need to challenge our notion of what a home actually looks like. But specifically, if we want to kind of get to brass tacks, we definitely need to change the tax code and stop subsidizing those who are already wealthy, and really start investing in opportunities for low wealth families to build wealth. That's the only one I know. And just as a profession, I took a vow of poverty, so I'm not going to get rich in my job, but I may get rich or I may build wealth in the family. I also think that, we need to reform the mortgage interest deduction. We need to protect low wealth families from actually wealth stripping practices like predatory lending. We really need to stand up and bolster the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And then, kind of as I talked about, is maybe investing or creating a child savings account that allows us to automatically enroll in retirement accounts. And then reinstating the first-time home buyer tax credit, creating kind of a refundable housing credit. So there are systemic components that make home ownership a reality, and we've allowed our tax code and tax system to not benefit the folks that need it actually the most, and it's actually benefiting those who actually don't need it the most. So we need to take a closer look, and which is why I appreciated what Assessor Wilson talked about with the Attorney General. Like, there are just predatory practices that live and hover in our communities. And once you get on that path, that pipeline for predatory anything, you're not going to own a thing. And so we need to also really be smart and be realistic about the situations that we are putting folks into and creating systemic barriers in the system for them to really not realize the wealth and the investment of home ownership. So we got some changes in our laws. And the last thing I'll say is there's been a lot of policy studies and white papers on some of the tax loopholes in Washington State. And I know it could be the third rail, but it is the difference between seeing that increase in home ownership, Black home ownership in the state. And let's just be realistic. Like, again, people don't need some of these things, which they're benefiting from. And then those that could do for the benefit aren't aware, or they're not eligible for the programs.
Thank you, Council Member. Wow, this is wonderful. I keep saying that, but it is every time I hear additional information. This last question is open to all panelists. It's kind of a question to provide us all some hope for the much needed changes. So I'll go ahead and just go ahead and ask it, and then open it up for all the panel is to respond. When I meet with individuals and leaders, such as yourselves here, that are at the forefront of solving monumental challenges, their view of the future, say in the next 10 to 15 years, is always of interest. What message of hope and inspiration in changing and enabling the policy environment to close the persistent wealth gap do you have for us? And let me know if I should repeat that question.
I'm just going to be brief because there's so much to unpack with that, but we have to make sure that we're addressing inclusivity in all of our policies because they all have impact on something else. So while we might be addressing zoning in one area and it may be directly addressing racism there, but if we're not effectively addressing our tax code, just like Deshaun was saying, then we're just, circling around the issues. So looking at how these issues and these intersectionalities impact families in a real way is really important, and really making sure that we encourage folks to participate in the process. We have been so disillusioned by leaders who, especially the ones who do not look like us, who are not accountable to us, who do not feel the impact of the policies that they implement on us. we walk away from the table, and then we have a responsibility, a shared responsibility, continue to keep pushing and advocating for policies that actually include us in the future of this community.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump on that participation train. You know, there was we were discussing DADUs in Bellevue, and there was so much. I mean, granted, there aren't that many folks. It's just a very concentrated and loud or vocal group who were opposed to it. And we were doing our neighborhood area planning for Northeast and Northwest Bellevue, and about a handful of people who, when staff came out with it, and it had very mild language, actually, because, you know, they were paying attention to the politics, I guess. And it was like, we will explore DADUs. And folks, I mean, wrote letters, testified. I mean, and it was the only narrative that was coming into city council. As soon as it was taken out, they were like, this is what public process, this is what listening to the community means. We wholeheartedly support this neighborhood area plan. I mean, it was a complete 360, I mean, like 180, right? Like in support of the plan. And the biggest issue is that was the only narrative. Maybe one or two people at one meeting or something. But other than that, for the series of meetings, it was just the NIMBYs opposed to DADUs. We have to participate in the process.
Yeah, I will jump in. We all need to feel a sense of urgency right now, because we actually have a window to correct the problem. And what gives me hope is the younger generations, they're not putting up with some of this stuff. And so I'm excited about what's to come, because conventional wisdom don't work no more, because it's not getting the job done. But we also have to be informed. We have to understand the practices. We actually have to build partnerships with institutions that are actually now thinking about, well, what can we do to address the issues that have come up in kind of the racial conversations in the last 2 years. Well, we got to work smarter and more thoughtful, right? That African proverb where you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you know, I think that go together. And I think we, traditional community-based organizations, actually have to raise to the occasion, so we can actually realize some partnerships, because a lot of the things that get done, a lot of the policies and zoning adjustments get done, but it's too late because the people have already left. So we need to learn and build on a lot of the kind of thoughtful, insightful, innovative policies, act on them so people can actually benefit while still living in the community. And so, and no more should we have like those arbitrary lines where we won't talk with banking institutions, where we don't talk to community-based organizations. We actually have to come together to solve the problem.
So why don't I do cleanup here, and I'll try to keep it really short back to my broadcast traditions. There are a couple of things that I think, first and foremost, this has been just an amazing discussion. I really appreciate you all bringing us together. I think, to echo what Deshaun said, we have to approach this with urgency. For God's sakes, we declared a housing emergency 5 years ago. Where the hell have we treated it like an emergency? I'm sorry, but you know, we've totally choked on this, and we paid a price. Yeah. So some of the things we need to do. I still am a believer in home ownership. I don't want to stigmatize anybody about being a renter, but we ought to look at ways that there are avenues to create opportunities for people to move from rental to ownership. We ought to look at ways that we can create funding opportunities that haven't existed in the past. We ought to look at ways that I raise $6.8 billion a year in property tax revenues. We should be asking ourselves, how do we use a portion of that to effectively reinvest in our community, to create more opportunities for Black and brown home ownership? And how do we overall make sure that the money we spend here, we earn here, also comes back to benefit here? And if we do that, I think we've got a shot at fixing this.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. And also, I just want to thank our amazing panel. And, you know, if you are not at the table, you're on the menu. And we have been on the menu way too damn long. And I don't know about all of you, but I'm fired up. I'm fired up to dismantle this racist system of inequality that keeps people from owning a home, keeps people from being able to move on and have a good, decent standard of living, because we deserve better. We deserve better, and we have been denied way too long. How many of y'all feel the same? Okay, how many of y'all fired up, ready to go? Okay, good, because this isn't going to be easy, and we're going to make this happen. So before we end this, I'm putting this in the chat again. We have information for everyone for the Civic Commons Black Homeownership Initiative. Also, I want to give a shout out to one of our region's great leaders, Ms. Patience Malaba, new executive director of the Housing Development Consortium. Kudos, and I'll also be putting her information in the chat. So sorry about that, but if you have information, or if you want information on how to get involved, Patience is one of our amazing, prodigious, fantastic leaders. So unfortunately, you're going to be receiving a lot of emails, but also feel free to follow myself as well. I'll put my information in chat. And I also want to thank my amazing, brilliant, and just all around, I'm glad she is doing the work that she's doing. Miss Katisha Arbery, thank you for your co-hosting. And yes, thank you everyone for making so much time and giving us this wisdom this afternoon. Thank you everyone. Have a good day.